Hello, everyone, and welcome now to day number 10, reading the 40 chapters of Exodus across the 40 days of Lent. This, of course, will be our final reading this week, as tomorrow, Sunday, isn't one of the 40 days of Lent, formally. And so here we are in some repetitious reading, but nevertheless, it's now with today's reading, we conclude a quarter of this book of Exodus. Thank you to everyone who's endured this journey with me, especially the last few days, as the readings have been quite repetitious. Now, through these series of plagues, so far it's 7 plagues, and Genesis and Exodus uses the number 7. Of course, there's there's going to be 10 plagues here, but Genesis and Exodus, the number 7 is of a tremendous import. And after number 7, it no longer says that Pharaoh hardened his heart, but here in chapter number 10, I have hardened his heart and his servants. And the purpose in verse 2 is that so it could be told throughout the generations that God made a fool out of the Egyptians. So here, in a sense, Pharaoh's exploitive, predatorial nature, trying to monopolize and essentially practically make fools of God's covenant people. God is going to reverse the script and make fools out of Pharaoh in Egypt. So once more, verse number 3, Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh. This is what God has said. How long will you refuse to humble yourself, release your people so that they can serve me? That is really the crux of the whole thing. Pharaoh refuses to be humbled here. His stubbornness, his pride is really getting in the way. If you refuse to release my people, I'm going to cover the territory with locusts. You're not even going to be able to see the ground. Whatever was left over from the hail in terms of your crops, well, it's not going to survive the locusts. I mean, this is going to be for somebody who, and it goes on to state, I mean, this is going to be unprecedented economic disaster, verse number 5 and 6. And for someone who's so concerned about the economic productivity, Pharaoh is sacrificing a great deal in order to retain his sense of power over these slaves. And locusts here, this plague is something we in our culture identify less. These locusts are quite aggressive and quite devastating in terms of the food supply. In verse 7, Pharaoh's servants now are showing their wisdom. Let them go, they say. So Moses and Aaron were brought back, and and once again Pharaoh is bending here, getting close to breaking. He says, who's exactly going to go with you? And Moses says, it's going to be our old, it's going to be our young, it's going to be our sons, and it's our daughters, it's going to be our sheep and our cattle. He says, no, only your men ought to go. And, that of course, that's not acceptable. So then in verse 12, here comes the locusts. They swarm all over Egypt. They cover everything. Pharaoh quickly, verse 16 says, calls Moses and Aaron back. I have sinned against God. Forgive my sin. Take death away from me. And so God turns a very strong wind, blows the locusts out to sea. What is understated here um, is this. We might um, talk about how, I mean, this is real brutal in a sense, these plagues. But God is showing some generosity here, is he not? He will here he responds to Pharaoh's words and removes the plague. He could have started with the worst here of the plagues, and that as it's going to get to, but it's progressive here as Pharaoh's stubbornness remains progressive, but his heart is hardened again. Then, with the conclusion of this chapter, here comes darkness, absolute darkness for 3 days. No one can see anything, and of course, the issue with darkness is this: we live in a world where there's an abundance of artificial light, and so when it's for me, right now at 3:39 a.m., I'm sitting and I've got a plentiful amount of light. However, in the world of antiquity, they had very little means of light. They had fire, but fire had to burn from a source and from oil, typically, or something like a candle. And you had to be efficient with your sources. And when there's total and complete darkness permeating everything, I mean, a candle isn't able to do much. An oil lamp isn't able to do much, except maybe let you see a little bit of a step ahead. The detriment here is to the crops. The crops need sunlight. It's also to the animals. Animals have to be fed. All production ceases for these 3 days. It's interesting, they wanted a 3-day weekend for the slaves, and so they could go out and worship and come back in. It's costing Pharaoh much more than that. Teaches us it's a good object lesson for agreeing quickly, because things could get a whole lot worse. And here's an underappreciated aspect. There have been studies conducted regarding those with light deprivation, those that were in prison, prisoners of war, things of that nature. And to be without light is just tremendously depressing. It weighs very much on the mind, the body, the emotions, the soul and spirit, even. And so this is quite a detrimental plague. So Pharaoh is going to call Moses and says, send everybody. Everybody can go out and do this, but leave your flocks and your herds here. But Moses said, who's going to provide us a sacrifice? And so once again, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. Pharaoh said, go away from me. Do not appear in front of me again. When I see you again, you're going to die. So Pharaoh here, he's negotiating, but he's trying to, as he's negotiating, he's trying to divide up. He's got no leverage. He's trying to divide up the people, the collective, then trying to divide them from their assets. He wants to win here, and it's interesting. He ought to be well aware at this point that the people could get up and walk out. And what's Pharaoh going to do? This is giving Pharaoh every opportunity to see reality. However, he doesn't. And now he threatens Moses. And so now we've got this somewhat exciting event here. We've got, in the next section, the climactic point of the plagues will come in Monday's reading. And so we're breaking out of some of the redundancy of the plagues and getting into the real development and shaping of the narrative going forward. So again, as we now close this week, thank you for joining with me, and I will meet you again on Monday as we will start the second quarter of this book of Exodus. Take care, everyone.